Ahora toca el turno de ver una pequeña conferencia de un gran educador, Sugata Mitra, que en la India hizo un experimento de poner unas computadoras en calles de lugares muy marginados y con ello logró demostrar cómo la curiosidad, la búsqueda de soluciones, el interés de las niñas y los niños por hacer útil lo que estaban viendo, hizo que aprendieran a utilizar esta herramienta sin tener ningún tipo de instrucción previa, lo cual nos habla de la importancia que tiene pues todo el saber natural de las niñas y los niños. Por eso la conferencia se llama Una educación mínimamente invasiva. Disfrutémoslo.
I wanted to talk about the future of learning, and as you know, the session is, what's the point of freedom? So when I saw that, I said, well, I mean, what am I going to say? Because what's the point of freedom is what schools are like right now anyway. Why do we need to change at all? Well, that's the story I'm going to try and tell you using a few examples. Firstly, we know what the problem is. We have just completed an age where people, millions of them, had to be prepared to do jobs that machines can do today. So in order to produce such people, like these, or those, what do you need? Well, they have to be able to do the same thing over and over again for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. They have to be able to read and understand instructions and not ask questions. And most importantly, they must never, ever be creative. Can you imagine what will happen if there is a creative assembly line worker? You know, you don't want that. So in order to produce these people who can work like machines, we built a system. You're all familiar with that system. Schools were designed to produce identical people. Everybody must know the same things. That's what it all looks like. We are all products of that system. So what's wrong? Well, the problem is that schools solved all the problems of the age gone by. They were designed to do that, and they did an excellent job. They produced all those identical people who did the jobs that machines do today. So what are we going to do with them now? That's the problem I think we need to focus on. Because when it comes to your child is not going to grow up in a world where he or she will have to do the job that a machine can do. So what are we going to prepare those children for? I ran into all this through a set of experiments now many, many years ago, 15 years ago, where I exposed children to the internet in public spaces. Very simple experiment. I didn't have an objective, I didn't have a design. I just provided the internet in public spaces to start with in India and just watched to see what children would do. We saw from those experiments that groups of children can learn how to use a computer and to use the internet by themselves. In those days, that was a very important result. It was unknown. Today, everybody knows it. Anybody who has watched a 3-year-old with an iPad knows that children can teach themselves to use computers. What else could they do? If they can use computers and the internet by themselves, what would they do with it? Well, play games, paint maybe, music. But is there anything else? About 3 or 4 months down the line in this experiment, I discovered that what children start doing after about 4 or 5 months, if they're given public access, they start asking questions from the internet. And these questions relate to almost anything at all. Things that they do in school, things that they're curious about, and so on. The internet doesn't know that they are children. So the internet throws everything it has at them. The children don't know what they are supposed to read and what they're not supposed to read. So they read everything. 9-year-olds start to quote from the Harvard Business Review. So what does that mean? People then said, but they don't really understand, do they? And I thought, well, why don't we test it? And I did this entire series of experiments on trying to see that when children in groups, and groups are very important, when children in groups work with the internet and they find all sorts of strange and wonderful things, do they actually understand? It's too long a story to tell you what those results are. Most of it is published. And it seems to show that, yes, indeed, in a certain sense, they do understand what they're talking about. So if that is the case, what does that mean for education? So you'll find lots of the, my work, other people's work on the internet showing or measuring this effect with children and the internet. So now I've been a teacher all my life, so it's not very easy to write that statement, but somebody had to write it. It would look as though groups of unsupervised children can learn almost anything by themselves. Is there a limit? Well, possibly there is, but I haven't found it yet. In England, in the schools of a city called Gateshead, I created what are called self-organized learning environments. How do they work? Well, you take a few computers, take about maybe 5 computers with big screens. Take 20 children and let them into that room. So in the Western world, the first question the children ask, where are all the other computers? To which I would say, well, they're not there. So you don't have to tell them that they need to make groups. They will anyway, if there are 5 computers and 20 children. And then you ask them a question. And you say, I've always wondered if this is true. I tried this this morning from my hotel's business center. I connected with a school in a Mexican city quite far away from here. And I worked with 11-year-olds. And I asked them the question, can trees communicate? And they said, no. So I said, well, how about if I give you about 20 minutes? And you come back to me and tell me, are you absolutely convinced that trees cannot communicate? After 20 minutes, they came back and said, no, they can. They can communicate with each other. And if they can communicate with each other, and this time they were asking me, do they have a brain? And I said, I don't know. It's strange to think that trees might have brains. And would you like to find out? And then they got to working again. That's the spirit of how these self-organized learning environments work. You can direct them towards curriculum, or you can direct them towards interesting, big questions. The questions have to be big, otherwise children don't engage. Our educational system, unfortunately, is built or designed backwards. When you get into a class and the teacher says, I'm going to teach you trigonometry, she doesn't say, what for? So if you are a child and you're sitting there and you are likely to think to yourself, why are you doing this to me? Do it to somebody else. But on the other hand, and I have done this once in China, if you were to walk into the same classroom and say, well, how is it that every iPhone knows where it is? So the Chinese children said, what do you mean? I said, you know, your iPhone, you say my location, and it tells you where it is. How does it know that? So they got to working on their few computers, came back after a while and said, GPS. So I said, what's that? So they said, you know, there are satellites, and the satellites tell the phone where it is. And I said, how many? And they said, 3, at least. So I said, what's this with 3? And then after another 5 minutes or so, they came around and said, you know, there's a subject called trigonometry. And so I'm holding my breath and saying, would you like to know how it does it? And they said, yes. That's what I mean. Thank you. You know, I know that's exactly the feeling I had when I saw that happen, and I realized that the system was backwards. We should have told them about the iPhones first before getting them down to the detail. So I discovered one other thing. What do you, the teacher, do while this self-organizing system is going on? Well, I found that you do very little while they're working, except to encourage them. So back in 2010, I put out an advertisement, an article in a newspaper saying, if you are a British grandmother, if you have broadband and a web camera, then can you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free? And I got hundreds. They're called Skype grannies, or the granny cloud. The granny cloud's job, like what I did this morning, is to set the question, set the ball rolling, and then every now and then say, fantastic, how on earth did you do that? And you don't have to put it on. Like this morning with your little Mexican 11-year-olds, I didn't have to put it on. When I heard them say trees communicate, probably from using their roots as the medium, what else can you say except to say, wow, fantastic. And that helps them. It speeds up the process. So SOUL is really easy to construct, and teachers are doing this sort of all over the world. Here's a little clip. I will cut it short because we don't have too much time.
Lessons learned from his very first experiment in India with foldable computers, now being applied to schools in Cape Town.
Stephen? Bonjour.
The process is that you take a group of children, you ask them to make groups of 4. Each group of 4.
Okay, I described that already to you. But there's a problem. The problem is none of this will work unless we change the examination system. At the heart of our schooling system is an assessment engine. And it looks a bit like this. You know, this is a picture from 1920s. It's an office in 1920. The next picture is an examination hall. So can you not see what we are preparing our children for? For offices that used to exist 200 years ago. That system is driven by the exam. So I've been testing children with examinations that are different. What will happen if you allow the internet inside the examination? Well, in England, there was horror. One teacher said, what? They will answer everything. So I said, don't you want them to? So if we have to prepare our children for a world that looks like that, their exams have to look like this. It's easy enough to do. Somebody has to just do it, you know. I'm sure students here will appreciate if their exam looked like that. I've been experimenting with what's called the school in the cloud. The school in the cloud is a facility where children can explore their innate curiosities. How do they do that? Using the big questions, using the groups, using all of that stuff which we learned for the last 16 years. And finally, we need to assess them. I don't know what that mechanism of assessment is going to be, but I know that the internet is going to play an incredibly important role inside that assessment system. Why is the internet not inside school? It's because our education system is in denial. It wants to pretend that the internet does not exist. We have to change that. In that change will lie the future of learning. Thank you.